What is up though, Lions fans? We are back for another episode of the YAK pod, and you already know what time it is. It is time for episode number 23 as we roll along. Now, as I talked about yesterday, we are going to continue our Combine press conference series, and I don't think it'll be very long because right now all we have is the Dan Campbell and the Brad Holmes press conferences. So let's get right into it. Yesterday we touched on the Dan Campbell press conference. Today we're going to talk about the Brad Holmes press conference. Now, we didn't really learn too much new that we didn't already get yesterday from Dan Campbell. As I said, these two are in lockstep, so they're going to talk about a lot of the same things, but they did talk about the Jared Goff extension. He briefly touched upon that. He talked about the philosophy with spending big money on these free agents. Now let's talk about that, because I think that's the biggest takeaway that Lions fans in general can use to try to figure out what moves are going to be made this offseason. Are we going to go and sign a Chris Jones? Are we going to go and sign a L'Jarius Sneed? Are we going to go after these big names, or these big fish as we call them? Now, in a previous episode, I talked about the Brad Holmes philosophy, and I talked about what a big fish is. Again, a big fish to us is someone with a big name. Like I said, a L'Jarius Sneed or a Chris Jones or a Justin Matabuke, who has been franchise tagged or will be franchise tagged, so he's not going to be leaving Baltimore. And I thought it was kind of a long shot for him to be leaving Baltimore anyway, because he was such a stalwart and he was such a big part of that defense. That's not a guy that you let walk out of the door generally. So these are the big fishes to us, or the big fish, whichever you would like to say. These are the type of guys that we're looking at and we're saying, this is a splash. If we get someone like someone with a big name, this is a splash for us. But Brad Holmes, again, a splash for Brad Holmes is a Brad Holmes guy, a guy who's already on the roster, a guy who they know. As I talked about yesterday, the culture and the player development and the human element is very alive and very well in the Detroit Lions organization. Now, the thing about a free agent that comes from an external source, another team, is that they just don't know these players. Brad Holmes said that it's easy to turn on the tape and say, oh, this guy's a beast, he's a monster, but they don't know him. They don't know what he is going to do. They don't know how he's going to fit in the locker room. They don't know how he's going to affect the rest of the locker, and how he's going to gel with the rest of the team, and how he's going to buy into the grit culture. They don't know. So in the free agency process, they don't have as much time with the players as they have with the drafts. They can bring them in. He mentioned being down the street from the University of Michigan and being able to go up there and, visit with those guys, visit with those players, and it doesn't count against your top 30 visits. And many teams that have college teams that are near them, very close to them, down the street from them, they go ahead and they take advantage of this as well. So you have things like that where you can just reach out and you can go and spend some time with these players that you can't with free agents. So with free agents, they're just looking for the bag, they're just looking for the money or what have you in many cases. Now there's a lot of dogs, a lot of people with grit, a lot of guys that you would want on your team, a lot of Dan Campbell guys, a lot of Brad Holmes guys out there in free agency, but they just don't know those players. So you don't want to I'm going to go to some extreme examples here, like Albert Haynesworth, right? Some of you are too young to remember Albert Haynesworth, but the ones that remember Albert Haynesworth, he was a menace, right? He was stepping on people, spitting in people's faces. I think he hit someone in the face with their own helmet or something. He was just doing all types of crazy stuff, and that was after he got his money, right? After he got his money, then he just started to freak out and just started to act out and just be an absolute menace. And there may have been signs of this before he got paid that big, biggest deal in history, for a defensive tackle deal. Like, everyone is the biggest deal in history. But once he got his biggest deal in history moment, he just squandered it, and he squandered his career, and he didn't really do anything after he got his money. except for get in trouble and except for be in headlines for negative things. So obviously, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are trying to avoid situations like that. And that's why he said we have to be very strategic and very calculated when we talk about signing free agents that are not currently on our roster, right? So he talked about drafting and developing players. And it's not that you just draft them and develop them and they don't pan out and you just keep them because they're your guys. No. He said that you draft them and you develop them and you hope that they pan out. Obviously, if they don't pan out, you have to move on from them. But if they do pan out, then that's when you take that money and you give it to those guys because they have earned it and they have grown up in your organization. And that's who you want to reward. So this is, their philosophy when it comes to that. He also talked about corners. Now, he said that the corners and the receivers are probably the most voluminous positions in this draft. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be good. He said the draft is deep with the corners, but that doesn't mean all those guys are going to be good. He said cornerback is one of his favorite positions to watch. It's his favorite position to break down, watch the film, watch them play. He said it's like poetry in motion. So he was a cornerback cross-check for a decade when he was with the Rams. So he was always breaking down film of cornerbacks. So if you can identify a guy with his physical traits, but you miss out on his intangibles, then you miss out on the player. That player is not going to be who you expected him to be because you looked at him and you said, oh, he runs a 4.3 40. Oh, he can jump really high. He's got all of this. And you're just looking at the combine numbers, but you're not looking at his anticipation. You're not looking at his reaction. You're not looking at his closing speed. You're not looking at all these different things because you're just looking at the physical attributes. You're not looking at his instincts. Why is he always around the ball? Is it his technique or is he an instinctive player? So there's a lot of things that go into evaluating a cornerback, and just because there are a lot of them available, it doesn't mean that you're going to hit on a cornerback in the draft because it is a very difficult position. And then you're talking about a position where most people will say, well, even a first round cornerback needs about 3 years to be able to understand if you hit on him or not. So the development time evaluation of cornerbacks is just not as easy as we would like to believe. So you might be able to look at a guy in college and you put on the film and then You know, Jeff Okuda just popped into my mind, man. I'm gonna have to get that episode done, but that was a misdiagnosing of an actual talented player. Again, they said Jeff Okuda was talented. He is not. But again, that's neither here nor there. I'm not gonna get into that. I did that yesterday. I've done it before. Again, I'm not gonna get into it. But he also talked about Terrell Williams, and he said that Terrell Williams was his defensive line coach when he was in college at North Carolina A&T. And that was his first position coaching opportunity. And he talked about how good of a teacher he was and how he was the coach that held everyone accountable. So he said he wasn't surprised at his success in the NFL. Yesterday, I told you that Dan Campbell called him the best defensive line coach in the NFL. So we're getting a guy who is known by Brad Holmes, who is known by Dan Campbell, and everyone speaks glowingly of him and his track record. He said when he was watching him develop people at Purdue, like he was just developing defensive line talent at Purdue, like the Cliff Avrils of the world and things of this nature, and he's just putting out all of these guys coming out of Purdue. Now, Purdue is not really a school that's known for too much of anything. Drew Brees is all Purdue is really known for. And for a guy to come and to put out all this talent in this situation, he said that's when he knew that he was cooking with gas. That's when he knew that, this guy was something special. So hopefully he's able to take a Broderick Martin and, a lot of the other guys who maybe have underperformed or weren't able to get on the field and develop them. Because like I said yesterday, the coaching staff is a big part of this culture, and it's a big part of the product on the field. Another situation that he talked about when speaking of coaching staff, he said that in the free agency evaluation, the scouting department is not the only department that's looking at these free agents and going, oh, we should bring this guy in, we should bring that guy in. He said the coaches are also a part of that, because the coaches have to buy into this player. If the coaches don't buy into this player, then you have a situation like Johnny Manziel. When Johnny Manziel sat down with Shannon Sharpe and he talked about how his head coach wanted nothing to do with him, and he had a defensive coordinator who said derogatory things to him, and all of these things. So if the coaches are not buying into the players, then you have that that loggerhead. They're not going to be able to produce well on the field, because I don't want you here. I'm not going to coach you. I'm not going to give you the opportunities. I'm not going to put you in the best position that you should be put in to succeed. So if you have that situation, it's just not going to be good for anybody. So that collaborative approach where everyone has a hand in evaluating free agents, and everyone has a hand of, yep, let's bring him in, or nope, let's not bring him in. That's how we've kind of pretty much hit on a lot of people. I mean, there's not a lot of people that we brought in that haven't been successful unless it was due to injury. The Emmanuel Mosleys of the world, Cam Sutton in the last half of the last part of the season, and so forth. It's been because of injury. CD Deuce, injury, things of that nature. So generally when they bring a guy in, he helps this team. He helps this roster. He helps in the success. So I mean, that's their approach. They're very collaborative. He also touched on the Jared Goff extension. There wasn't really too much about it, but he said, we understand where we want to go. We understand the direction that we want to go with Jared, and out of respect for the player, they're not going to talk about it in the public spectrum, but when they have updates, they will let us know. So this is all he really said about the Jared Goff situation. Also, I have to give him a shout out. He talked about the development of my guy, the electrician, Jahmyr Gibbs. He said Jahmyr Gibbs was electric, right? But he talked about how basically Jahmyr was just going too fast. He was just relying too much on his speed. And then once he realized, yes, I am fast, but I don't have to go fast every single place. I don't have to go fast everywhere on the field. He was able to kind of slow down and be patient. And that's when his vision improved. So he's like, he expects big things for Jahmyr going forward, to continue to do big things. Because obviously he did very big things in his rookie season. But he said he's got a lot more in the tank. So that's hopefully not all we're going to see from the electrician. Hopefully he will continue to electrify us for years to come, and keep zapping those defenses. So that's pretty much it, man. Those were pretty much the biggest takeaways. So don't be surprised if they do make what you would call a big move or a splash in free agency. The only thing that you have to understand is that they have to be able to know the player, and they have to be able to be comfortable with the player. So while it may not look like signing someone big, signing someone with a name is on the horizon, it could happen if they know the player, or if they're comfortable with the player. They believe that whatever time that they spent with this player, they believe this player is genuine and sincere, and what you see is what you get. And when they talk to him, It's not a lot of BS. It's not a lot of smoke screening. It's not a lot of hemming and hawing, just trying to say the right thing to get the bag. If they find that a player is genuine, they may go ahead and pull the trigger. So we never know. They don't want to be frugal. They want to be smart. There's a difference. We're not calling them cheap. We're calling them smart. They're trying to make intelligent decisions when it comes to this, because it can set you back, man. If you spend the money on the wrong guy, it can set you back. If you spend the assets on the wrong guy, it can set you back. He talked about having multiple picks and being able to move up and down in the draft, and being able to move up and get a Brian Branch, and to be able to take assets and move, get more assets, move down and get a Hendon Hooker. So he was happy about that situation, and now he's looking at it as like a challenge, being the 29th pick, because you're not in that, he called it the top 10 beauty pageant. You're not in that where it's just like, just grab the guy, who's the best one up there. So now it's going to be a challenge with the evaluation. And we know Brad Holmes can hit anywhere in the draft, but it's just the 29th pick being that low in the first round, that's different. That's uncharted territory for us. So he's excited about that, man. So as I said, those were the biggest takeaways from the press conference. I appreciate you guys tapping in with me again. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the likes. I appreciate the shares. I appreciate you people. Appreciate you all. So anything that you want to add in the comments, let me know below. Anything that you agree with, that you disagree with, let me know in the comments below. And as I always say, smash that like button, subscribe, and be the kind of friend that tells another friend. You got to share. You got to let them know what's going on in this kitchen. You got to let them know we're cooking up the finest meats up in here. All right. So as always, I will see you next time. Peace.